First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for being out here. People still trickling in, and I think will continue to. I also wanted to thank Jim for coming out, co-founder of Guelph. We need a whoop for a little more than that. We have like a cross-border global e-commerce legend, so I'm excited to be on the same stage with Jim and having been at his event. Our original vision for this was a family feud-style game for the times that we're in, and so the name of the game is Tariff, Feud. We're going to go through that. We're going to have a few opening remarks, then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to start the game. And so as more people will come in, we'll go through there. So I'll give a couple of remarks, and then Jim will give more wisdom than me, definitely, and then we'll go through there. So we're going to give our take on global e-commerce, and then we're going to play the game, and then we're going to mingle. That's about it. That's our agenda. All right. Nothing more than that. I'm going to talk about cross-border for a second. I spent 3 years at a cross-border company, pour out some liquor for Pitney Bowes. Anyone in the audience? Yeah, they don't have a cross-border offering anymore. But one of the things we talked about is like, cross-border is an interesting thing, and even this slide has evolved over the years. I actually presented this a number of years ago. But there's really an intersection of three things that makes someone really accelerate their investment in cross-border. One is a couple of things are about the brand, access to the product, and then margin. Clearly, like low-margin items like toothbrushes don't necessarily work best for cross-border sales. You can get them not only because of you can get them around the corner at a pharmacy. They're also not locally scarce, meaning like why do you want to ship something cross-border to those? So I think those two things, if you can get something at your corner store, at a mall, is very plentiful. You don't need to order it cross-border. The other one is kind of interesting, and I would say the state of the union is evolving here. If you listen to a lot of the commerce platforms, and if you shop anywhere online and have been born any time in the last 50 years, every brand now is global by default. And the reason is because the internet is global by default from a findability point of view. And so if you're online, you're global. And so for our friends at Passport, that means that we can help people with marketing. Now, brands that are known globally or known in specific markets because of any number of reasons, because of the number of American expats or European expats or wherever the brand is from, Hong Kong or, people who have traveled to Australia or anywhere else, if there's inbound intent from a market to a global website like that's based in the US or the UK, for instance, then that increases the reason you need to localize your website, display a local experience, all those things. But still, even if you're not, someone or anywhere in the world can consider your product. And so even if you're not like a globally known brand, you can still benefit from local marketing in a specific market to increase the same reason that having a store locally increases e-commerce business, because now people know to go to the website. And so if you open up an entity or operations in a local market, then this actually increases your e-commerce sales. Doubly so if you have more digital marketing efforts to there. And when I was speaking with Alex recently on the Watson Weekly podcast about this, he hinted that Passport was actually helping people in the future, potentially with digital marketing initiatives, to help people get more exposure in local markets to increase their sales. So this is a little bit of the sweet spot, and you can see as you get further away from the lower margin tends to mean that, look, it's expensive. Once the duties, taxes, shipping fees get over 25% of a cart value, it tends to add more friction, and doubly so if the retailer doesn't have margin to support the business. And so that's a challenge that we'll talk about. But wanted to just introduce and kind of broach this concept as we get into some of Jim's commentary And proud to introduce Jim Okamura, co-founder of Global E-commerce Leaders Forum now. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Rick and team. Thank you to the Passport team, for having me here today. Just wanted to kind of provide a few kind of thought starters, a couple of data points, but really it was the wisdom of the Guelph community that I wanted to share with you, because we had the opportunity to talk to a number of the global e-commerce leaders who have been, solid in our community for over the past, decade. But just some of the numbers, kind of speak for themselves. Obviously we know e-commerce is growing, at higher rates outside of the U.S., and so we see those numbers growing constantly. But that 55%, kind of, struck me as, that's a nice number that these are the consumers shopping outside of their domestic, market. That still leaves a lot of runway. We've got, more upside, potential there. And the 11-country number was something that if you were at Shop Talk and saw Zia from eMarketer, speak, she shared some of this data point in terms of how many countries are going to be at that 20% e-commerce penetration of total retail sales by 2030. And while yes, there are going to be some of the countries that you would expect to be there, South Korea, China, the US, the UK, but some of the countries that are coming on strong, Indonesia, Mexico, we're seeing some of the emerging markets rapidly grow. If you haven't been following the Mexican, e-commerce market, it is absolutely exploding in recent years. So these all represent tremendous, opportunities for any brand. But going back to Rick's slide, again, it does kind of start, with brand equity. And that's where I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the some interviews we did, with the Guelph community earlier this year. I had the great pleasure of, talking to a number of people who have been really involved in the Global E-commerce Leaders Forum in recent years. And I kind of cherry-picked a few of the quotes just to help share where we at right now. Obviously, there was, the broad theme of uncertainty was kind of, really holding court across almost everyone. But the big thing I thought was really encouraging was the resolve that a lot of these VPs of international, were sharing in terms of they're not being deterred by any whiplash that's going on, with regulatory issues. They are still committing, to this growth, this strategic growth pillar of international. And most of them, again, were delivering on their numbers, stronger growth outside of the US, market. So again, this is a little bit skewed because generally I was talking to who I would consider to be the veterans of international, not necessarily those who are just starting out. And often it would come across as cross-border. Yeah, that's typically the starting point. And it's fairly easy to turn on cross-border, but clearly where we're going is again, greater localization, going from that first, kind of statement where we hear from a lot of companies who have said, we're really focusing in on our core markets, the UK, Canada, Australia, Western Europe, kind of in general. And while, yes, we've been hearing that for a number of years, we've also seen some of the most successful brands internationally not limit themselves to that. Not leave money on the table by kind of going after some of those markets that are perhaps in that gray zone. And I think that's where we're going to see some companies make strategic bets on key markets like Mexico or like Indonesia or some other Latin American, markets. The second quote was something that, is closely tied to again, some of the regulatory changes that are going away. So Section 321, really allowed, a lot of brands, to set up inventory pools and across the border in Mexico or in Canada and fulfill orders, to U.S., customers. Well, that kind of loophole has now gone away. So, but again, what I heard was this steely resolve, from a number of these companies saying, okay, this is not, going to be a disaster. It's just another problem for us to solve. We're now going to figure out, okay, how do we move inventory around to optimize global? So again, what's the front end business strategy saying that the back end, like inventory, really needs to kind of align with? the last two comments, I think really speak to where we're going next, right? It's taking the next step to compete against local competition. Right? Again, easy to kind of turn on, cross-border e-commerce, but once you really start to localize, that customer experience, have inventory pools in that local country or region, start to develop and curate, the site for the local audience. That's when you're now competing head-on, with the local competition, and that's where we're really seeing the most successful retailers and brands really kind of ratchet up their global game. And the last comment is also very, closely related. You have to have content relevance and local places and faces. You have to have that ability to really speak to that local consumer, how they want to be spoken to. I think especially, these days, given, let's say, the American reputation, that's out there globally. I think it becomes even more important right now that again, brands are really showing that they're making that effort to become local and to understand that local, customer. And so that's really where we see some of the best leaders, again, in global e-commerce have already made these steps. We see a lot of companies in general who are just starting their international journey. So if you're with a brand here today, that is just starting out internationally, there is, like a path that we have seen, as companies kind of grow their international footprint. And you can do so in a fiscally responsible way. Number of experts around the room here that you can talk to, in terms of, how they can kind of solve for those issues. But these are this is a time right now where we feel, because international is so topical, obviously tariffs have been, in the news. This is creating opportunities for companies to really take a good look in the mirror and say, okay, what is, my brand equity internationally? How can I take advantage of that? How do I supplement that with a great customer experience? And again, who do I choose around the room to be my partners and kind of going forward with this? And these are some of the things that we're really kind of looking forward to as we kind of get through, this turbulent, time here. And again, we start to really, focus on, future global growth. So I'm going to leave it with that. And Rick, back to you, and we'll be starting the feud in a bit.